Hey folks, it's Jim. We're going to try and go over a breakdown of the world economics and how things are flowing, and I'm kind of separating it in two so you can kind of see how something's developing here, hopefully. And this is my view of how things are developing. Okay, the first thing is apparent. We have 5 billion over here. We have 1.5 billion over here. We have 1 billion down here in nations like Australia and Japan who do business both ways with both SDR. Whoever will make the best deal, okay? And this is just two and others. Okay, but the preponderance of the world is broken up like this, okay? For a reason, and you'll see that as we progress along. The first things we see is these are old economies, right? Developed. These are new economies, underdeveloped, okay? The next thing we see is that these are consumption economies, and these are production economies. And whenever we see a consumption economies versus production economies, we see massive trade deficits. When we see massive trade deficits, we see a transfer of wealth. Why? Because they produce something, bring it over here, sell it, we consume it, and the wealth transfers back here. Now, what is some of the evidence that we see that is making this apparent that the wealth is transferring? Has to do with gold, silver, diamonds, and other hard assets are seemingly piling up over here. One noted article that you might want to look up is Indonesian vaults overflowing with hard assets. They're so bad they're having to build new vaults all the time because of the amount of wealth that they're storing in Indonesia in this case. Okay, so and that's gold, silver, jewels, art, so forth like that. Okay, so the next thing let's look at is how these two sides value hard assets, okay? And maybe some of you haven't seen this before, maybe it's all old news to you. But anyway, the US, we really don't know how much gold is there because they won't let anybody inventory the vaults. The EU, I'm not sure how much gold the EU has. I do know the IMF holds some gold, a few thousand tons. And that's the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. England, I'm not sure about their gold and silver assets. Canada, from what I understand from a friend who lives there, says that they've sold off all their gold. So to me, over here, gold is a question. And that also goes to the consumers. How many people do you know in America that actually have gold and silver? What are silver and gold stackers? Maybe 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 with our population? I mean, let's face it, 9 out of 10 probably can't even consume gold or silver or diamonds because they're barely getting by, right? The debt load is pretty high over here for the consumer base, and it's an old developed economy, so all the consumers are in the market already. But so that's something that's apparent. So gold over here is a question, but let's look over here. Gold, silver, and diamonds and other things. China, the last 2 years was the #1 producer and consumer of gold alike, and has been consuming a lot of gold and producing a lot of gold for a long time now. Okay, so we know that China's really into that, and we know that their population saves in gold, silver, and other things. Okay, and not just currency, right? So they value it. The Chinese people value it. In India, it's their cultural. Gold is a big cultural icon in India for weddings and things of that nature. Dowries, I would imagine, things like that. So India has been consuming over 50% of the entire world's gold supply, for production anyway, annually, has been going to India because just of their culture, okay? And this has been going on for years in India. Now Africa, we know, is a big producer of gold. They value gold. Their currencies have failed and come back many times, so the African nations do value gold as hard currency or wealth transfer in the case of a failed currency. We also know Arab nations value gold too, the Saudis. We know that when Iraq went into Kuwait, for instance, they stole the gold and went back to Iraq. That's what Saddam did, and that's why we went and tried to get the gold back. Now that's just one example, but Gaddafi was into gold and wanted to take the Middle East and Africa and others back to a gold standard. So we know that Gaddafi was into it as well. Of course, he's been overthrown and other things have changed. But we see this. This is a continual theme over here. Not just the nations, but the people are into hard assets, okay? The next thing, Brazil, I'm not sure about their gold holdings, but they've had currency fluctuations too, so I'm sure their population consumes gold as well. Russia is the #1 platinum and palladium producer in the world, and has been buying a lot of gold right along with China. So we know gold is not a question over here, gold, silver, diamonds, and other things. Whereas it is a question over here, okay? And sometimes we can't even get the numbers of how much is over here, all right? So the next thing apparent is when this group gets involved, say in the Middle East, it leads to war, chaos, political disruption, everything else. When this group gets involved, say with less Russia, there's peaceful trade. In other words, this group spends hundreds of billions of dollars in overhead with war and other things, trying to control the economics of the nations they get involved with, such as the Middle East and so forth. And then that just leads to more deficits over here. Whereas this side doesn't spend anything on that, and therefore their margins are better in their trade deals because they don't spend all that. In fact, China and India have, and the BRIC nations, less Russia of course in this moment, have always said, we will not be involved in your politics, we will not be involved in your problems, we are only here to do business. That's the way they do it. So their margins in trade are much better as well. And Africa absolutely loves China's trade deals with them because they both, form a symbiotic relationship and both grow. And they're both equitable deals for both sides. Okay, so people want to do business with China because wherever China goes, it grows. That's just the way it is, okay? Whereas this group gets involved and it seems to be political chaos and turmoil and everything else. Might have something to do with the fact that the people don't run the government anymore, but something else does. Okay, but they just have good economic ideals with regards to trade, and it's much more sound than over here spending hundreds of billions of dollars trying to control everything. They just do business and make good trade deals. So they have good relations, we wind up with chaos, and that's why I put the Arab nations over here, because eventually they're going to have to sell their oil to China and India, whereas over here the US and Canada will support the US and Canada or North America with all their excess oil. And also England's come on with a big oil hit off its coast. So between England and Russia, the EU gets supported, and so that leaves the Arab nations are eventually going to have to go to China and India to get rid of their excess, and probably Europe too, and wherever else. Okay, so that's kind of all of that. Now let's move on from here, and let's take a look at something else. Now let's go to tech. Tech now is over here, right? Tech supremacy, but soon it's going to be over here. And how do we know this? Because they're putting out 4 engineers for every 1 over here. And that's because of the math and science educational programs with regards to the school systems. The top 5 school systems with regards to math and science are all in Asia. Canada is the best over here at number 10 in the world. England's number 20. The U.S. is a despicable 28th with regards to math and science with world education. Okay, so now we see that it's not just now, but in the future there will be more engineers and math and science scientists coming out from over here as well. Huge disparity. Okay, so remember when before Made in Japan was a joke and then all of a sudden they became the best in the world? China and India are on the same course. The Mahindra tractor is the best-selling tractor in the world. That's kind of a testimony to the quality of that product, right? And then we can look at a company called Face++. Has written a new algorithmic software that beat both Google and Apple with regards to facial recognition. Yes, they have now become the best in the world, I believe, at facial recognition, and that's directly out of China. The next thing is the 2 largest genome databases in the world are in China, folks. And that goes to why I think there will be a migration of the best and brightest minds over to here, like there was for a long time over here, the other way. Because technologically they are exploding forward very fast, and it's because of this engineering disparity. But if you're a scientist or you want to do health and genome studies, you're going to want to go work on the best database in the world, aren't you? And same thing if you're, with Face++. If you're a software engineer, you'd love to get a piece of this, wouldn't you? And go in there and experience that new algorithmic software and better yourself and just be a part of the latest and greatest stuff, right? And remember, China doesn't want Google and Apple necessarily in there. and it wants to build its own software out so that it's more conducive to the Asian needs, right? And I believe India is going to follow suit with that. I believe Africa is going to join with them, and obviously the Arab nations will follow suit well, because wherever they do business is where they're going to use the technology, right? So, I hope that I'm kind of explaining everything well. I know I'm going quick because we got a lot of information to cover. Okay, but then again, how do we know the massive trade deficits lead to transfer of wealth? Indonesian vaults overflowing, constantly have to build new vaults. It's happening a lot over here, okay? I've told you all the savings numbers. I've shared that on previous videos. We're over here, at least in the U.S., I'll speak for the U.S. here, really struggling 9 out of 10, okay? Where over here, the average person is saving a large percentage of their income. Okay, so let's move on to Fortune 500, another shift that's taking place and is going to take place significantly very quickly over the next few years. Fortune 500 companies in the world, okay? Right now, it's over here, and a preponderance are in the U.S. But this is shifting, and it's projected by 2025, most will be over here, and that China will have more Fortune 500 companies than the U.S. at that point by 2025. I think this may take place sooner, but hey, I'm not an economist. I'm just showing how things are shifting, and I do this for myself so that I can make my own projections and decide what is best for me to do in my financial world, okay? But China is really getting progressive on health and all that. There was a guy over here in the U.S. who is a PhD with regards to nutrition and health, and he tried to get our government involved in this, and he tried to show what his studies were showing. And because we're lobbied by the food industry and controlled by pharmaceutical industry, and every other industry controls our government now, they kind of told him, hush, hush, go away. We don't want to focus on that information or get it out. Well, he went over to China and he offered the same deal, that he could do these studies. China said, yeah, please do. And he did. He wrote like this 1,000-page book, and China took it, and they said, wow. And he showed where the nutritional differences in these provinces were leading to different health problems, and there was a direct correlation. Well, combine that with the 2 largest genome databases in the world, and you can see that China is actually being very progressive with regards to nutrition and its population. And they're going to try and head off. They've learned from the U.S.'s debacle with regards to massive healthcare costs. China's going to try and change that for them going forward. Not that they don't have healthcare costs now, and they don't have a lot of problems with regard to nutrition, because obviously they do, but you can see how progressive China's getting about it. They've seen what happens over here with regards to poor nutrition and healthcare costs, which is becoming a huge burden on the U.S. economy. China's going to try and change that for themselves, and they're progressively getting ahead of the game. And that's why some of the best and brightest minds will flow there that want to be in this field, because China is supporting it openly, honestly, and going for it. Whereas over here, it's hush-hush. We don't want to talk too much. We need people to buy our products. Okay? So you can see a difference there. And remember, good relations with trade and all of that. So I hope this has all made sense to you. And the other thing is, these economies are developed. These are underdeveloped, a lot of these, okay? And especially China's populations, India's populations. Between all of these, they can bring on 2 billion new consumers over here to stimulate these economies just by exposing them to the modern ways, right? Modernizing these people. 2 billion new consumers. They can grow from within without any support over here, okay, with more consumption, which this is tapped out for consumption. So they're going to have to stimulate that internal growth and become developed economies. They're moving from underdeveloped, developing, and they will become developed. In other words, the majority of their population will be in the consumer fold. Whereas over here, everybody's already in the consumer fold, and our economies are stagnant at best. Okay, so I'm just trying to break the world down for you here to show you all this stuff, and hopefully it makes a lot of sense. And remember, made in China isn't a joke anymore. It's getting better all the time. It's the fact that people want cheap goods manufactured for products by some of the corporations over here leads to a lot of poor China manufacturing, but they're getting better just like Japan, and a lot of that has to do with the number of engineers that are coming out over there, okay? So anyway, Hope this made sense. Jim out.